We've all heard, keep it simple, stupid. And I think in game development, this is very strong advice. These are words to live by. Brian Kernighan, who is one of the early fathers of the C language, I don't think he's actually the one who invented it, but he wrote the original syntax book that we all used when we took computer science, said this. He said, debugging is twice as hard as writing the code in the first place. So if you write the code as cleverly as possible, you are by definition not smart enough to debug it. This is exactly right. And in game development, this doesn't just apply to the code. This applies to all aspects of game development. If you make your combat system so intricate and hard to understand that you barely understood it as you put it together, you're not going to be able to fix it later. And God help anyone who isn't you trying to debug it after the fact. If you are making your animation system a complicated web of different animations layering on top of each other, you are ending up with something that is very hard to maintain and very hard to use. Famously, and I don't know if this is actually true or not, or if it's simply apocryphal, famously FIFA, right before they switched over to using Frostbite, had to go and resurrect the code from, I believe it was the N64 version of FIFA, because there was some sort of asset generation that they needed to generate a new asset from, and that code was basically lost. Don't become a tech priest like in Warhammer 40k, where you have systems that are so intricate and so complicated that they become lost to time, and all you know is how to rub the unguents of shipping upon them in order to allow your game to ship. If you don't understand your processes, if somebody doesn't understand your processes, how in the world are you in control of your game as a whole? Okay, a bit of a hot take digression here. I kind of feel like at some studios, Unguents of Shipping might be a great way to describe a lot of the processes and things that occur as a game approaches its date. Crunch is arguably something that I think happens at a lot of studios for reasons that aren't really fully understood. All that is known is when you crunch, game come out. They haven't really stepped back and considered why that's happening. They might give a reason that it makes people work harder or get more done, but I would argue, and I have argued in the past, that that's actually not what's going on at all, that the reason why crunch make game come out has nothing to do with people's productivity levels and everything to do with increasing the level of completion urgency on the project. If you don't understand what's going on and why certain things cause other things to happen, then you can keep doing things that are a terrible idea because you don't really know what you're trying to do. All you know is crunch equal game come out, not adequate completion urgency equal game come out. Maybe there's a better way to generate completion urgency. But it goes beyond just processes and systems, because you have to explain a lot of this stuff to the player as well. If you make the most brilliant and intricate crafting system that allows you to do whatever you want, that is only good, that is only useful if the player is able to unpack that and understand how to interact with it. One of the problems with the primary crafting system of Dragon Age Inquisition is that it's too many things interacting with each other. It doesn't just have recipes. It has this concept of forms that you put different ingredients into. And then layered on top of that is the system that allows you to change what the item looks like. It's really hard to explain that to the player. And as a result, a lot of people don't actually engage in the system very well, even though it's a very powerful system in Dragon Age Inquisition. One way to get intricacy without getting complexity is by attaching simple systems together. If they are interacting with each other in too many complicated ways, then that basically just forces them to knot together into one complicated system. But if they are adjacent but not overlapping very much, they show intricacy without actually being very complicated. If you actually look at crown molding at the top of a fancy building, these days it's just molded straight out of MDF. But the way that it used to be made is it's made of a bunch of simple systems layered on top of each other. So you take a 1x6 and then you put a piece that has a quarter round on it, and then you layer on another piece with another piece of quarter round, and you end up with something that has a very complicated looking silhouette, but is actually built out of very simple pieces. Those simple pieces don't really interact with each other, they just sit adjacent to each other. So you end up with intricacy without actual underlying complexity. You can do that with game development as well. You can have simple things that sit beside each other, and in the interaction on their edges, cause intricacy to occur. You do have to be careful, as I said, because it's pretty easy for those systems to start to overlap, and at some point that overlap just becomes them becoming one really complicated system. Keep them adjacent as much as possible in order to keep their complexities apart. What you end up with is two simple systems that are easy to maintain, easy to understand, easy to explain, that work together like a more intricate thing, that become that complexity that you may be craving without actually having to have all of the problems of a complex system. Going back to crafting, you can imagine taking the different parts of the Dragon Age Inquisition crafting system and separating them out into different things. In fact, Inquisition actually does this to some degree. But if you were crafting a weapon, and the weapon itself was one crafting system, which created the weapon out of iron, and then you had a second upgrade system, and the upgrade system was where you applied the different properties based upon the elements that you used in it. And then you had a third system where you were able to change what the item looked like based on a third crafting system. By separating them out more explicitly, and maybe you go to separate UIs and even separate people in order to trigger it, you're able to reduce the complexity that you're presenting the player with and giving them three relatively simple things that they're able to engage with independently, and then they interact into something more intricate. Now, I don't know that that actually simplifies your testing burden. In fact, it might actually make it a little bit worse, but it does give you something that's a little bit easier to onboard the player with, because if they want to craft a weapon, they interact with this system. If they want to upgrade a weapon, they interact with this system. If they want to transmog a weapon, they interact with this system. And each system can be relatively simple and provide intricacy in the ways that they interact. You've got to be able to write it and maintain it. You've got to be able to explain it to other people so that they can test it and potentially maintain it after you're gone or on another project. You want your code and systems to stand the test of time and be used in a decade, ideally, and not have to have someone go back into the archives to resurrect the machine ghost of your original system to keep the thing working. You want people to be able to understand it and pick the ball up and carry it forward. And finally, you need to be able to explain this thing to players so that they can actually have fun with it. If you can't do any of those things, this system is going to end up failing somewhere along the way, and it's going to probably end up getting pulled out and replaced with something a lot simpler and potentially worse. Keep it simple, keep it maintainable. That's what game development's all about, is the interaction of a bunch of simple things to make something that is greater than the sum of its parts. A special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you are interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that down in the description. Additionally, we have merchandise now. I'm currently wearing File It All and Let Triage Sort It Out. There is a shelf below this video if you're interested in picking up some merchandise. What do you think? Do you want to fight me on this one? Do you feel that intricacy is part of your enjoyment of video games? What you might find is that systems that you think are really intricate are either secretly two simple systems interacting in interesting ways, or they are lying to you as to the intricacy of the system overall. Throw some of your favorite systems down in the comments. We can talk about them. I will see you again soon. Thank you.